The Middle East has once again become the center of global tension. In a rapidly escalating conflict, the reported death toll in Iran has now crossed 1,000 people, sending shockwaves across the international community. At the same time, the United States Senate has taken a controversial step by backing expanded war powers for former U.S. President Donald Trump, intensifying fears that the conflict could spiral into a much larger regional war. For millions around the world, the situation raises a frightening question. Is the world moving toward another major war in the Middle East? To understand the gravity of the situation, we must begin by examining what exactly has happened over the past few weeks. The tensions between the United States and Iran are not new. For decades, the two nations have remained locked in a complicated rivalry filled with sanctions, military threats, and proxy conflicts across the region. However, recent events have pushed this fragile relationship to one of its most dangerous points in years. Reports coming from various international monitoring groups suggest that the number of casualties inside Iran has risen dramatically as clashes and strikes continue to intensify. Hospitals across several Iranian provinces are reportedly overwhelmed, and emergency services are struggling to manage the growing number of wounded civilians. The Iranian government has accused the United States and its allies of being responsible for escalating the situation, claiming that recent military actions have targeted key strategic locations inside the country. Meanwhile, leaders in Washington argue that these actions are necessary responses to what they describe as increasing threats from Iranian-backed groups operating across the Middle East. At the center of this political storm stands Donald Trump. During his presidency, Trump adopted one of the toughest stances against Iran seen in modern U.S. history. His administration withdrew from the nuclear agreement that had previously limited Iran's nuclear activities, reimposed heavy economic sanctions, and authorized military actions that significantly raised tensions between the two nations. Now, with the U.S. Senate signaling support for expanded presidential war powers related to Iran, critics fear that the situation could rapidly escalate beyond diplomatic control. The decision by lawmakers has sparked heated debate across the United States. Supporters argue that the president must have the authority to respond quickly to threats posed by hostile governments and militant groups. They believe that delaying military decisions through lengthy congressional debates could weaken America's ability to defend itself and its allies. Opponents, however, warn that granting broader war powers risks bypassing the constitutional balance designed to prevent unnecessary conflicts. According to them, allowing a single leader too much military authority could drag the country into another prolonged and costly war. These concerns are not theoretical. The Middle East has already witnessed decades of devastating wars that have reshaped entire nations and displaced millions of people. Many analysts fear that if tensions between the United States and Iran continue to escalate, the consequences could be far more severe than previous regional conflicts. Iran occupies a strategically vital position in global geopolitics. The country sits along the Persian Gulf, one of the most important energy corridors in the world. A significant portion of the world's oil supply passes through the narrow Strait of Hormuz, a maritime route that Iran has repeatedly threatened to block during times of conflict. Any disruption in this region could send global oil prices soaring overnight, triggering economic shocks across international markets. Already, financial markets have begun reacting to the growing instability. Investors around the world are closely monitoring developments in the Middle East, fearing that prolonged conflict could destabilize energy supplies and disrupt international trade. Beyond economic consequences, the humanitarian toll of the conflict continues to rise. Reports from humanitarian organizations suggest that thousands of families have already been displaced in areas affected by the fighting. Schools have closed, businesses have shut down, and many civilians are living in constant fear of further attacks. In some regions, local communities have started organizing emergency shelters as residents prepare for the possibility of prolonged unrest. For ordinary people living far from political decision-making centers, the conflict is not about strategic alliances or geopolitical influence. It is about survival. Parents worry about the safety of their children. Workers fear losing their livelihoods. Entire neighborhoods face the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. The growing death toll has also intensified international calls for de-escalation. Several global leaders and diplomatic organizations have urged both sides to step back from the brink and return to negotiations. However, diplomatic efforts have so far struggled to gain momentum. One of the biggest obstacles to peace is the deep mistrust that has built up between Washington and Tehran over many years. From the perspective of the United States, Iran's expanding influence across the Middle East represents a serious security concern. Iranian-backed groups operate in several countries, including Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, often clashing with forces aligned with the United States or its allies. From Iran's perspective, American military presence in the region is viewed as a direct threat to its sovereignty and security. This mutual suspicion has created a cycle of confrontation where each side interprets the actions of the other as aggressive and dangerous. Breaking this cycle has proven extremely difficult. Adding to the complexity of the situation are the numerous regional players whose interests intersect with the conflict. Countries across the Middle East are closely watching the situation, as any escalation could draw them into a broader regional confrontation. Some governments have quietly expressed support for stronger measures against Iran, viewing it as a rival power competing for influence in the region. Others fear that war would destabilize the entire Middle East, creating chaos that could spread far beyond Iran's borders. International organizations have also begun issuing warnings about the potential consequences of further escalation. If the conflict expands, humanitarian agencies say the region could face a major refugee crisis. Millions of people could be forced to flee their homes, placing enormous strain on neighboring countries already struggling with economic and political challenges. History provides several reminders of how quickly regional conflicts can spiral out of control. A single miscalculation, an accidental strike, or a retaliatory attack can trigger a chain reaction of events that no leader originally intended. That is why many diplomats emphasize the urgent need for communication channels between opposing sides, even during times of intense hostility. Without dialogue, misunderstandings can quickly turn into disasters. In Washington, the debate over war powers reflects these concerns. Some lawmakers argue that granting expanded authority is necessary to deter potential threats and demonstrate strength on the global stage. Others believe that military escalation without clear long-term strategy could repeat the mistakes of past conflicts in the Middle East. Public opinion in the United States is also divided. Many Americans remain wary of entering another overseas conflict after the long and costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Others believe that confronting adversaries early may prevent even larger conflicts in the future. As the Senate's decision continues to spark controversy, the world watches closely to see what happens next. Will diplomatic pressures succeed in calming the situation, or will the escalating tensions push the region toward a wider war? For now, the only certainty is uncertainty. The death toll continues to rise, families mourn lost loved ones, and the geopolitical chessboard grows more complicated with every passing day. What began as a series of political and military decisions has now evolved into a crisis with global implications. The coming weeks may determine whether this confrontation becomes another chapter in the long history of Middle Eastern conflict, or the beginning of something far more dangerous.